Welcome, everybody. We have a special guest with us tonight. I need to look at the owl. We have author and journalist Richard Andrews. I know Richard because he is being published by my publisher. His book is coming up, if not next, like pretty close to soon in the lineup. Richard is going to be leading us through a kind of hero's journey today, by means of his book and the adventures in it. So let me tell you a little bit about Richard. He is the son of a Polish cavalry officer. Richard grew up in Australia before migrating to Quebec with his Canadian muse. In between, he chalked up more than 30 years as a journalist, foreign correspondent, diplomat, and freelancer. An award-winning editor, he writes for newspapers, travel magazines, foundations, industry journals, and IT companies. Richard also teaches part-time at McGill University after working in China and Malaysia with writing stays in India, Brazil, Lesbos, and Malta. He now lives on a former vineyard in Quebec's eastern townships. So I'll put up quickly again, just the cover of his book. There you go. It's called Key to the Highway. It's an adventure story, you know, along the lines of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, and it'll take us all over the place. So, okay, Richard, I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks for the introduction, Lisa, and thanks for the invitation. I'm honoured to be in the presence of such august writers, scholars, and philosophers. So please feel free to. During this talk to comment or question whenever you like. Any assistance on the road to individuation would be greatly appreciated. You played Key to the Highway, you played On the Road Again, rather, which is relevant to Key to the Highway. It's a song that's featured in the book, but one of the reasons I chose it was because it's got a lot of harmonica in it, which blues harp, which is in the book. It also starts off with playing by the Indian tambura. So there's a mixture of Indian music and American blues music. And that, in a way, also reflects what the book is about, because it combines Indian myths, Norse myths, Greek mythology, and so on, as part of Joseph Campbell's monomyth, saying that they're all part of the one. With Carl Jung, with this group, I'd have to say I'm more of a second cousin to Carl Jung rather than close family. I became acquainted with the good doctor via Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, and that journey started with the movie Mad Max. Would you believe, the Road Warrior? Like George Lucas with the first Star Wars movie, the Australian director George Miller was influenced by Hero with a Thousand Faces. And I remember reading an article about it, how he was basing The Road Warrior, which was the second in the Mad Max series, on Joseph Campbell's book. And it's interesting that the first one was a big hit. The first Mad Max was a big hit in Japan, because it strikes to the samurai legend, the idea of the lone warrior with an ancient code of honor, who has the gift of inestimable value to help others and to redeem himself in a world that's coming apart. And that world that's coming apart is very much the start of the hero's journey in many ways, if you think about it. It's whether it's the Hobbit, whether it's Luke Skywalker, and the threat from the Death Star, and whether it's miscongeniality, where there's a mass murderer and she's a female cop who's dissatisfied with her present lot in life. Or another movie I can think of is, you might remember, Romancing the Stone, which is a classic hero's journey movie in that the protagonist, the heroine in this case, is a writer who's an older single woman, goes to singles bars, is fed up with the jerks, so she's unhappy with the present state of her universe. And the call to action is a note from her sister saying that she's been kidnapped, and she sends her a map. So that's the call to action there. Classic hero's journey, just like in Star Wars with the hologram of Princess Leia calling on Luke Skywalker to help her. I'd like to try to. I'm going to try to show a couple of pictures on screen to see if it works. It started with Mad Max, and I was really intrigued by it because it reminded me of my youth. So that's me about 53 years ago in my Mad Max phase with my friend Rod Foster. So one of the attractions of
left or right?
One of the attractions of the hero's journey was that it provides a structure. It was a way of looking at my life in a sort of a more ordered context. So instead of just seeing my life as this erratic series of chaotic events, once I read the hero's journey, I saw it as part of the journey where you go through all these different sorts of phases. And through that, I found a book called The Writer's Journey by a writer called Christopher Vogler, who was influenced by Joseph Campbell. And Chris Vogler was, he still is, he's like a Hollywood script guru. So he's called in when movies are in trouble and they say, we don't know what to do with this. For example, he saved The Lion King. They weren't sure what to do with it. And he tweaked the script and turned it into basically a version of Hamlet. And Chris Vogler sort of characterized, he wrote out the hero's journey in a way in this memo, which did the rounds in Hollywood, and it became adopted by a lot of directors and writers, and it's now taught in a lot of screen schools. And so that sort of took me to Joseph Campbell. What was interesting was when I went to the original Joseph Campbell, I've got here somewhere. I found that he had added a couple of things that Vogler left out, and that was things like
the other way around. Vogler added things.
Now, what he did was I compared what Vogler did with what Joseph Campbell did. And for example, in the original Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, he also talks about the meeting with the goddess, woman as temptress, which I suppose is not very woke now, and atonement with the father. So I decided to include those in the book as well, so that my version of the hero's journey in Key to the Highway is in some ways closer to Joseph Campbell than Chris Vogler. And then that took me to Carl Jung and Man and His Symbols. And what was, so I read that, and there was one section that really blew me out. And that really sort of got me hooked on the whole thing. And if you'll bear with me, I'll read out what it was that attracted me to the whole thing. So what the good doctor was saying is the universal hero myth always refers to a powerful man or God-man who vanquishes evil in the form of dragons, serpents, monsters, demons, and so on. and who liberates his people from destruction and death. So the narration of ritual repetition of sacred texts and ceremonies and the worship of such a figure with dances, music, hymns, prayers, and sacrifices grip the audience with numinous emotions, as if with magic spells, and exalt the individual to an identification with the hero. And this was the part that really got to me. We said, if we try to see such a situation with the eyes of the believer, we can perhaps understand how the ordinary man can be liberated from his permanent personal impotence and misery and endowed, at least temporarily, with an almost superhuman quality. Often enough, such a conviction will sustain him for a long time and give a certain style to his life. It may even set the tone of a whole society. So that really, really grabbed me. And so that was a very strong influence on the book. What I'd like to do is just to, I think, Lisa, you've got the video of that sort of the cartoon truncated version of the hero's journey, just a sort of a reminder of the 12 steps that are commonly referred to.
What do Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo all have in common with the heroes of ancient myths? What if I told you they are all variants of the same hero? Do you believe that? Joseph Campbell did. He studied myths from all over the world and published a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, retelling dozens of stories and explaining how each represents the monomyth, or hero's journey. So, what is the hero's journey? Think of it as a cycle. The journey begins and ends in the hero's ordinary world, but the quest passes through an unfamiliar, special world. Along the way, there are some key events. Think about your favorite book or movie. Does it follow this pattern? Status quo, that's where we start. 1 o'clock, call to adventure. The hero receives a mysterious message, an invitation, a challenge. 2 o'clock, assistance. The hero needs some help, probably from someone older, wiser. 3 o'clock, departure. The hero crosses the threshold from his normal, safe home and enters the special world and adventure. We're not in Kansas anymore. 4 o'clock, trials. Being a hero is hard work. Our hero solves a riddle, slays a monster, escapes from a trap. 5 o'clock, approach. It's time to face the biggest ordeal, the hero's worst fear. 6 o'clock, crisis. This is the hero's darkest hour. He faces death and possibly even dies, only to be reborn. 7 o'clock, treasure. As a result, the hero claims some treasure, special recognition, or power. 8 o'clock, result. This can vary between stories. Do the monsters bow down before the hero, or do they chase him as he flees from the special world? 9 o'clock, return. After all that adventure, the hero returns to his ordinary world. 10 o'clock, new life. This quest has changed the hero. He has outgrown his old life. 11 o'clock, resolution. All the tangled plot lines get straightened out. 12 o'clock, status quo, but upgraded to a new level. Nothing is quite the same once you're a hero. Many popular books and movies follow this ancient formula pretty closely, but let's see how well The Hunger Games fits the hero's journey template. When does Katniss Everdeen hear a call to adventure that gets the story moving? When her sister's name is called from the lottery. How about assistance? Is anyone going to help her on her adventure? Hey, Mitch. What about departure? Does she leave her ordinary world? She gets on a train to the capital. Okay, so you get the idea. What do you have in common with Harry Potter, Katniss Everdeen, and Frodo?
It's interesting that reference to you're not in Kansas anymore, of course, is from The Wizard of Oz. And I read a book called The Wisdom of the East, which referred to the Wizard of Oz, written by Frank Baum, who apparently was very interested in Buddhism. And the Wizard of Oz is very much classic hero's journey, but it's also apparently an ancient Buddhist myth. And so you get the call to adventure with the cyclone and Dorothy being taken to the to the land of Oz. She goes into the next world, into the realm, and she and the Tin Man and the Straw Man and the Lion go in search of the wizard that they hope will give them, wisdom, courage, and emotion, and for Dorothy a way to get back to Kansas. And they find the wizard, and after Toto pulls away the curtains and shows that the wizard is a fraud, he comes up and he says, "You didn't need me at all. The answer was within you all the time." So the Lion had displayed courage, the Tin Man had shown intelligence, the Straw Man had shown some emotion, and Dorothy had the answer to get back to Kansas at any time. She was wearing the red shoes. All she had to do was click them. So it was really interesting to find that link with the hero's journey, Buddhism, and the Wizard of Oz. So all of these were sort of influences when I wrote Key to the Highway. The book actually started off as a MA thesis some years ago, and it just got sorry.
Yeah. You froze for a second or two. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So we're just saying the book started off as an MA thesis some years ago, and it was just gathering dust in the corner. During the pandemic, when we were, during the lockdown, my wife said, "Why don't you do something with that old thesis of yours?" And try to turn it into a novel. So that's how I spent a few months during the pandemic, turning an MA thesis from the University of Newcastle into the novel that we're talking about today. So looking at the book, apart from the magic harp, unfortunately, I didn't discover a magic harp, but much of the novel is based on real events that happened to me, though I'll only admit to the legal ones. And people I knew or interviewed as a journalist, and they included musicians, drug smugglers, mentors, business executives, oil drillers. And what I did was I turned those people into gods and archetypes, into tricksters and shapeshifters, sirens, minotaurs from Greek mythology, Indian. I used Indian and Norse mythology, and the Arthurian legends. So the harmonica, I noticed that in that cartoon that he was carrying like a sword, which is the equivalent of the lightsaber that Luke Skywalker carries, or Excalibur, the sword. So I used a harmonica because it's musical and it's portable, and I gave it magical powers, because when I was very young, sometimes magical things happened when I played it, very badly, but still stuff happened. Also, so the harmonica became the lightsaber or Excalibur. Also, there's a strong link to motorbikes in the book. There's the cover picture, which was painted by a friend of mine who's an artist, who rides an ancient Indian motorbike. Canned Heat in Australia, certainly, they were the favourite group of bikers. So you'd go past a pub where Canned Heat was playing, and you'd see about 50 Harley Davidsons lined up, and you'd see these rather large, tattooed, muscled gentlemen boogieing away to Canned Heat. So another thing that happened, and this also takes us back to Jung. It's a sort of I suppose you call it synchronicity. And I'm going to read you something. So in the foreword of the book, when I was writing the book during the pandemic, I decided it needed a foreword, and I thought where does a lot of this come from? How can I encapsulate this? So what I did is I wrote a brief foreword, which is based on a natural event, and I'll just read it to you because something really interesting happened. So the foreword goes something like this: my friend Tom was an ex-biker who quoted the classics, played blues, and sometimes sold his paintings. We returned from long journeys one winter and shared a shabby bedsit in London. One cold, wet evening, Tom stopped eating his spam dinner, surrendered our last coin to the power meter, and he asked, what would it take to return home just once, fit and tanned on a new BMW with a gorgeous companion on the back, instead of just turning up broken, scrawny on the Hackney bus? Because what we found was, after our journeys, we ended up scrawny, had worms or something, and were broke, and got back home because we're always traveling on the cheap, so we had to put up with bed bugs and stomach worms and all of that sort of thing. Anyway, the foreword goes on. I lost contact with Tom when we travelled on, but his question was the genesis of a fantasy that took over my life. Mate, if you're reading this book, here's how it goes. And that's the foreword to the book. And it starts off with a fantasy motorbike sequence, the erotic sequence that Lisa referred to, read out, which sort of sets the theme of the book. Was about a day or two after I wrote that foreword to Tom saying, mate, if you want to find out what happened, read the book. I got an email from him. 51 years since we'd seen each other. He'd tracked me down, and 51 years and 2 days after I wrote that book, he tracked me down and we reconnected. It was just as if it was last week. It was just like that. And so we reconnected. He ended up marrying an American hitchhiker that we picked up at one time. He's now in his 80s, and he's still on the road. He doesn't ride motorbikes anymore. He restores old combi vans and goes driving with them. The last time he wrote to me, he'd been climbing, he'd been going on a walk in one of the parks in Washington State, and he fell off a boulder that he was climbing and broke his leg. And he was stuck there. He was by himself, and he had to be rescued. So luckily, some other hikers found him, and they called in some first responders and rescued him. So it was great to hear from him and to see that he's still on his own hero's journey. He also sent me a painting, which I've got it. You can just see it in the background. What he did was he sent a reimagining of the original trip across the desert that I took in a van with my friends, which I mythologized in the book. And he sent me a painting of that. And so that's a painting of the trip that we took across the desert. And that's where we met this brutal cop called, I called him in the book called Rama, the Indian god of death. So he became part of the book. And things like the attempted jailbreak, that sort of happened. His beating up of one of my friends also happened. A whole lot of things like that actually happened. And I fed them into the book and turned him into, the god of death. In the middle of all of this, I got into blues music. Hence the title of Key to the Highway, which is probably it's an old blues song. And I also found that when you get into the blues, you get into the mythology of the blues, and with its African influences, it has many parallels with European mythology. So the idea, the Faustian pact that I refer to, that Lisa read out, the idea of selling your soul to the devil for some earthly reward, that refers to the story of Robert Johnson. And you know the story about how at the crossroads, he sold his soul to the devil, and in exchange, he was able to learn the blues. But the devil got his payback very early. Johnson died at the age of 27. Supposedly, he was playing in a juke joint, and an angry husband put rat poison into his whiskey, and he died of that. The interesting thing was he died at 27, like Jimi Hendrix, Kurt Cobain, Brian Jones, Amy Winehouse, Janis Joplin, and others, the so-called 27 Club. So I'm wondering, did all these people make a pact with the devil to sell their souls for, a brief period of fame, infamy, perhaps? So it just got me thinking about all of that, And could Johnson see it coming in the last song before he died? Because the last song he wrote was "Hellhound on My Trail." I don't know if you've got that, Lisa. Did I send that to you? The link to Hellhound?
I don't think so.
Look, I'll try to play it. If it doesn't work, we'll just skip it. But it's a very eerie sort of song, and once again, it's referred to in the book, the idea of the demons pursuing him. So in the song, Johnson, seems to be very aware of there is something after him. Written in the 1930s, and that song, Robert Johnson's playing, shaped generations of guitarists, blues players, rock musicians, Rolling Stones re-recorded a couple of his songs and so on. And so there's great sympathy with that. It's interesting, I also found that there's a legend associated with Niccolo Paganini, the classical violinist, and the same legend is associated with him. And there was one report that when he was playing on stage, they thought the only reason he could play so well was because they could see the devil looking at him from the sidelines. And the legend said that he had made his violin strings out of human gut instead of cat gut. So it's a story that gets around quite a bit. Another song that I was going to play, and I won't try to do it now because it seems to be too difficult. It's a song by Muddy Waters called "The Hoochie Coochie Man." You might remember that. I'm the Hoochie Coochie Man. The interesting thing about that one is there's a lot of references in it to hoodoo, voodoo, Afro-American religions. He talks about the black cat bone of hoodoo, and he talks about the magic number 7. He says, I've got, $700. I've got seven women after me. He strings a lot of sevens together, and which refers back to the magic number 7. There's 7 days in the week, the 7 dwarfs, 7 steps to heaven. And interestingly enough, there are 7 notes in the blues scale. So when Chris Hunter learns to play the harmonica in the book, he's taught by Apollo, by a correspondence school. And he learns the magic number 7 in terms of playing the 7 notes of the blues scale. And the other interesting thing is that if you look at dice, the Hoochie Coochie Man, he talks about gambling and so on. And I was reading about dice, the gambling dice, that they date back to ancient Egypt, ancient China, and the opposing sides of a dice, the opposing sides, they always add up to 7. So and there's also the 7 in craps and so on. So it's the idea of the 7 notes and the magic number 7 is recurring in a lot of mythologies that I found out when I was doing the research for the book. So doing it took me down some really interesting alleyways. It also took me to Brazil. Interestingly enough, I was telling Lisa about my trip to Brazil, and there's a strong Brazilian theme in the book. So right at the beginning of the book, in the fantasy sequence, talks about Iemanjá across the oceans, the Afro-Brazilian goddess, who in the syncretic Brazilian religion is the equivalent of the Virgin Mary, but also refers to a god in the Yoruba religion, along with a whole lot of other gods. So there's a Brazilian theme in the book, and it came up, and it's interesting. It came up in a lot of ways. What I found was that in Brazil they've combined Catholicism with the Yoruban religion, and it comes out in candomblé, and it also appears in strange places. So you'll be walking down the street. You might be walking in the business area of Rio or Sao Paulo, and you'll find a cigar, a bottle of cachaça, spirit, put as an offering at the crossroads of two busy streets, just like that. And there are sort of candomblé ceremonies that you can go to. Apparently, I tried, as I was telling Lisa, I tried to go to one of these ceremonies. I went to the tourist office in Salvador de Bahia and said, I want to go to a black magic ceremony, candomblé, and they said, sorry, they're not on until after Lent. So it just shows that. And also I went into a religious shop, with all the statues of the Virgin Mary and Jesus, and in amongst them you've got Shango and Oshasa and all the gods, and they're sitting next to the Catholic statues and symbols, and it's where I bought it. It's a symbol. It's an African symbol. It's shaped like that. It's a fertility symbol, and you wear it around your neck if you want to have children. And so I got that from a religious shop. So and that took me. So that took me to Brazil, and as a result of that trip, I also developed this real passion for Brazilian music, and I think it came from I went to Brazil during Carnival, which is, it's like Busby Berkeley on steroids. It's just absolutely overwhelming. And I was staying in a cheap hotel, which was near an empty car lot, and the bateria, the drum section of one of the summer schools, used to practice just near my window. So I went to sleep late every night, with the sound of the Brazilian rhythms in my head. And I think they got into my subconscious, and sort of I've had this passion for Brazilian music since then. And so that also features in the book. And similarly, I was there during the time when the military was still in power. So it was just before the Brazil had moved to a form of elected democracy. And so you still had a lot of paramilitary, had death squads, shooting people, assassinating people, and all that sort of thing. And on one night, this is how I turned one of the people I met into a sort of a manifested goddess. It was I was with this young woman journalist from Rio, and we were driving through she was showing me around Rio, and we went down one of the back streets. She wanted to show me something, and we got hauled up by the paramilitary, and they had their guns drawn. And so we got out of the car, and they said they were looking for bank robbers. They said there'd been a bank robbery in the area. And anyway, there were two of them. And so I was standing, her name was Luciana, and they started looking her up and down in, how can I say, a most unprofessional fashion. And I felt, I looked like I'm going to be the third wheel in this particular trying this particular vehicle. Anyway, so what she did was she talked them down. It was incredible to see it. So she sort of ended up like Athena protecting Odysseus. So she took hold of the agenda, and she said, "What do you think you're doing? Here I am showing an Australian journalist around. What sort of impression is he going to get of Brazil with you pointing guns at him? You know, you say you're after bank robbers, go and do your job. We're obviously not bank robbers." And so she took the dominant position, talked them down, and they just let us go. And so I turned a sort of a variation of that story into the book, so that I wanted to, you know, once again, I wanted to talk about people I'd met manifested as gods that sort of protected me or taught me or challenged me or so on. And there's a number of those within the book. Just to finish off on the Brazil section, there was a popular song at that time. It was called Canto de Osania. And once again, I'll send you the link to that. So it was a popular Brazilian song. The words were written by a poet called Vinicius de Moraes, he was the one who wrote the original words of The Girl from Ipanema. If you probably remember that song.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, that song, when it was translated, it's turned into a sort of an unrequited love. You know, I look at her, but she doesn't look at me. When he originally wrote that song, it was a lament to lost youth. And so the daughter, the young woman that he wrote about was a symbol of the youth that he'd lost, and he was yearning for his lost youth. She was, by coincidence, she was the daughter of a general who was running Rio at the time. She also ended up as a talk show host. Eventually became very famous. But the song itself, the one that I was talking about, that was popular, Canto de Oxânia, it's an interesting song. It's not the sort of thing that Justin Bieber would sing about. What it's about, it relates back to the Afro-Brazilian religion, and it's a warning against the use of love spells or witchcraft. It's telling people, don't use that. They say, you know, love. He said, you can't have love without pain, and so don't use witchcraft. Don't use magic spells. And Osania is a spiritual figure who looks in the African culture, looks after herbs and medicines and potions and so. And so this was a popular song that people sang about, sort of don't go and use magic herbs and spices to try to win the heart of your loved one. So I found the whole thing really intriguing, and it all started coming together with, you know, the blues and the music and the journey and so on. So that's Brazil. Lisa, when we were speaking, you said I should mention the call to adventure. And and it's something that I would like to talk about, because there are a number of calls to adventure in the book, but I'd like to read just one of them, because it relates to a lot of the themes in the book. So the context of this is you've got a young, 12, 13-year-old who's bored, lives by a creek, which to him is sort of like the holy Ganges or the River Nile or something like that. And he's got a couple of friends, and he's involved in a slingshot war with people on the other side of the creek. They start firing slingshots at each other. And so the war goes on for a few days. and it's not getting anywhere, and neither side is winning. And so what Chris Hunter does with his friends is they do something that's the equivalent to the Trojan horse to fool the other side, which enables one of them to sneak in behind them and to destroy the enemy. So what I did was I wrote that particular battle as if it was the Trojan Wars, with people seeing each other as various characters in the Trojan Wars. And I threw in a bit of the Arthurian legend in it. So the call to adventure part is Chris Hunter and his friends, they've won the war, they'll go across the creek, and this is his moment of triumph. So this leads to the call to adventure. So he's sneaked to the other side, he's got rid of the enemy. So it starts, I ascended the ravine and raised my arms in triumph to a chorus of cheers from the other side of the water. The conquerors soon arrived to bask in the spoils of war. But for me, the excitement wore off quickly. Somehow the victory had left a sense of anticlimax. What had we won? What good are warriors and weapons when there's no more foe? We reclaimed the golden ball, dismantled the enemy fort, and planned a new hut. It was never built. Thori is like a manifestation of Thor, the god of Thor. The god Thor. Thori becomes a drummer because instead of hammering with a hammer, he hammers drumsticks. But anyway, Thori gathered up the slingshots left behind and wandered around the battleground looking for other booty. Hey, come and have a look at this, he yelled. We ran to join him in a hidden alcove at the other end of the bank. An abandoned bikini top lay in the sand next to an unopened packet of Trojans, a picnic rug, and an empty bottle of Bacchus Reserve Hermitage. Someone obviously had a better time than firing rocks and insults across the creek. But it looked like a hurried departure for some reason. A large flat boulder stood nearby with 7 candle stubs on top. Strange markings were drawn in the sand. I'm not sure what really happened. Perhaps one day I'll solve the mystery. I looked around the boulder and caught a dull glint in a deep crack. Something had fallen deep inside. Maybe it was valuable. We took turns to reach through the jagged, rocky edges that protected the treasure. Whatever was down there might be the key to the moonlight revelry, I thought. I plunged my hand into the crack, ignoring the cuts and scratches. I felt a metal object and pulled it out. The reward for my pains was an old, tarnished harmonica. We were all disappointed with this find, but agreed I'd won the right to keep it as a battle trophy. With a vague commitment to meet again the next day, we drifted off our separate ways. I returned home, dressed my cut hand, and examined the harp. It felt solid and powerful to hold. Was this the reward for my combat wounds? If so, it deserved a cleanup. A rub down with a rag and silver polish revealed a mysterious symbol edged on the top cover plate. Egyptian? The body was made of some alloy embedded with tiny blue flecks. I blew it. The sound was piercing, but hardly musical. A slide button at one end doubled the range of notes, but also made the whole instrument more puzzling. Restoration complete, I placed the harp next to Cerberus, my dog skull, on the bookshelf, and returned to reading comic books. For the first time, I noticed an advertisement on the back cover of The Adventures of Odysseus. The Apollo School of Music was offering correspondence lessons. A black and white drawing mimicked the familiar Charles Atlas bodybuilding courses. The central figure was a harmonica player with a wreath on his head, surrounded by an adoring circle of long-robed females. Apollo taught Orpheus, I'll teach you, said the heading. Follow the call to adventure in music. Send coupon now for free trial offer. The address was a post office box in Canberra. My curiosity was aroused. I cut out the coupon along its Corinthian borders and sent it off. There was nothing better to do. I had lost interest in wars and weapons. Okay, so that actually referred to an actual correspondence course that I did when I was 12. And it was called the Apollo, it was called the Melody School of Music. And the person who was in charge of it was sort of like Apollo, that he didn't just issue, how to play a harmonica, but all sorts of epithets and aphorisms to improve your life and how to breathe properly and all this sort of thing. And some of them were pretty nerdy. So I thought I'd incorporate that in the book. And so what I did was I turned Apollo, the god of music, it was one of his attributes, into a mentor for Chris Hunter, and he teaches him to play the blues. So that's basically what the book's about. It goes into India, the adventures in India. Also I meet a couple of tricksters. There are a couple. One is, I call him Loki, after the trickster god in Norse mythology, and Freya, who's a goddess also in mythology. And they were based on a sort of a Bonnie and Clyde type couple that I met when I was traveling in New Zealand, who got into all sorts of mischief, scams, having to do the run, all sorts of things. Fascinating couple to be with, but I left after a while. It was a bit too hot for me. What I'd like to do is, I'm just thinking, you've got the tango one, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
I thought perhaps we could play a bit of tango, because the tango features in one scene in the book, in which Chris meets Sita, the goddess, and he rescues her from Ravana, the evil one in the Ramayana. But in this case, the evil one is a member of a neo-Nazi group, and Chris rescues her from him, and his weapon is the harmonica. He's got a big harmonica, and he smacks the evil one in the nose with the harmonica. So the evil one has got a broken beer glass that he's about to cut Chris up with, and Chris protects himself with the magic harmonica. And it was interesting. I got the move of that from the Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi, who's it's the equivalent of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. It's a Japanese version of that, and there's a movement. There's a movement in that. It's called the Book of Water, in which you pretend to be yielding to the enemy, and then when their guard is down, you strike with your sword. So I use that in the confrontation with the neo-Nazi. The other thing I'd like to do, I'd like to try to play this, because the playing of the harmonica is really a central theme in the book. And I found one track. I thought, what would be a really good track to play? So apart from the classics like Muddy Water and people like Little Walter and so on, I thought, where is the harmonica going now? And I found a video clip which I'd like to try to play if it works. And it's with two people, two young people. They've taken it to the next level, and it's a sort of a dueling harmonicas type of video. And what interested me was, you've got a British blues player on one side, and the other side, it's a woman playing harmonica, which is pretty unusual. For a long time, the harmonica was like the saxophone. Very few women played it. And so in this one, she and he are battling it out on harmonica. And in the book, one of the goddesses is a capoeira champion who um, who who meets Chris. So she's a martial arts champion as well as being a goddess. In this case, the woman Rachel Pass is a judo champion who plays harmonica, and I thought that sort of fitted together. So I'm going to try to play it. If it doesn't work, I'll send you the link. So let's just try it, and then we'll move on and perhaps have a talk about heroes' journeys.
Yeah,
Now,
so pull it up before you screen share.
all right, so okay, I won't screen share yet, so I'll pull it up.
I was also, while you're doing that, I was also taken on page 1 when the main character breaks into, he's playing in a band in a bar and signals that they're going to play a tango. And everybody sort of goes, but he plays Libertango by Astor Piazzolla. I mean, that's just that's arousing. So I if you want to play that one, I've got that one queued up too.
Right, great. All right, well, let's see if we can find.
So just to point out another interesting kind of synchronicity, I'm reading through Richard's book, and his main character's name is Chris Hunter. And it finally dawns on me one day. It was like, oh my God, Chris was the name of the son of Phaedrus in Robert Persig's Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I'm like, was that on purpose? It's another motorcycle journey.
Yeah. In this case, it was I used it because one of the Indian people that he meets points to the fact that Chris also refers to Christ, Krishna, and Chryseis, the one of Apollo's one of Apollo's priests, I think. So it's got a sort of a multi-mythical sort of aspect to it too.
Right. Wow. Okay, that was amazing. I mean, I never got much past Oh Susanna.
Well, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was young,
Spontaneity.
you know, when I was 12, I used to play. That was a sort of harmonic I was playing. I'm trying to take it up again and try to get a better sound, but those guys put me off. So I'm trying to get that sort of sound, but that's just watching. It's like being an amateur golfer and watching Tiger Woods with watching those two guys.
So, should we open? Do you want to take some questions? Or do you want
Yeah,
to
sure.
do you still have more about the various stages of the hero's journey that you wanted to talk about?
Not really. I'd like to know about other people's hero's journeys. So, I mean, that always intrigues me. Just going back to that video clip, I was reading about Will Wilde, the harmonica player, and his hero's journey, for like, was he was at a party when he was young, and there was a party pack there with balloons and plastic things, and there was a plastic harmonica in amongst all of those, and he picked it up and started playing it, and that was his call to adventure. He started learning harmonica after he picked up the little plastic one. So it's funny how just really little things like that can sometimes take you onto a whole different path.
Yeah. So let's open it up, and all you let me get it move the spotlight so we can see all the folks in Zoom land as well.
Yeah.
Just for a quick aside, I'm just curious what you mentioned that the earlier matrix for this adventure was a dissertation or a thesis.
Yeah.
About what?
It was about the hero's journey.
Okay, in the context of a study of psychology, or
it was the idea of it was a creative arts course, and the idea of it was to write a novel and a thesis that explained what it was about. So the theme was the hero's journey. So I did this novel, which was far more abstruse and esoteric than the one that you see now. There's a whole lot of really vague and obscure references in it that the profs liked, but and helped me with, but it wouldn't work with it as a novel. I remember showing a draft to a friend of mine, and he said, "You know what? This is absolutely incomprehensible."
Well, talk a little bit about iceberg writing.
Okay, so what? So I come from, but my background is basically radio journalism. So you've got to. So my background is you've got to condense a story. One of my editors told me that there is no story that can't be told in 100 words. So in other words, you're going for all the stories. When I was working for Macquarie National News, you're going for 3 or 4 pars, 3 or 4 sentences, 100 words had to fit into 30 seconds because we had to get 6 stories into a 3-minute news bulletin. And so it had to be succinct, had to be concrete. The sentences had to be short because radio is a medium that is a background. Usually someone's doing something else while they're listening to radio. They're driving a car, chopping vegetables or whatever. So they can't go back over, it's not like reading The Economist. We can go back over the long involved economic explanation of why cryptocurrency doesn't work or something like that. So you've got to get the meaning across. simply and directly. And so that really affected my style of writing. And in fact, I find it hard to write more than 100 words on anything. But also, I was influenced by Hemingway and his style of writing. I mean, he worked for the Toronto Star here in Canada for some years, and his style of writing is very very journalistic, very concrete. He wouldn't say, I felt afraid. He would say, the sweat was running down my face and I peed my pants or something like that. It's all very concrete. So that affected my style of writing. And in terms of the pyramid, sorry, not the pyramid, inverted pyramids also another thing, but the iceberg style of writing is one of the things that Hemingway aimed at, in which the top third of you read the top third of the iceberg, but there's 2/3 that are hidden. And the reader has to bring those to the story. And as Lisa pointed out, that's in many ways, that's a subconscious. So a good example of that is what do you call white elephant? What's it called? White elephants in water, of white elephants.
Like water for elephants?
White water for elephants, yeah. It's that one where it's a conversation. The whole thing is just done as a conversation. It's very short. It's 3 or 4 pages of dialogue, and the topic of abortion is never mentioned straight out. And so when you're reading that story, you're getting the dialogue and you're getting the feelings and the interplay between who wants the abortion to happen and who doesn't, and why. But the 2/3 of it is underneath. The sort of the motivations and the psychology are below the surface. And that's in many ways what I try to do with my writing, that I put something on the surface and I want the reader to add to it and say, oh yeah, okay, so that's really, the fight between Theseus and the Minotaur. That's what that's really about. Or that's really about, Athena helping Odysseus. Or, that's really about, a trickster or a shapeshifter or Brer Rabbit tricking someone.
So I do want to say that your writing can be read on both levels. You can read it just on the 1/3 surface level, and it makes perfect sense and it's a good story. But if you have the cultural knowledge to add that other 2/3, it makes it so much richer, and gives your mind more to chew on at the same time.
Right. That's an interesting point. I sent out the manuscript to a whole lot of people because I wanted them to write nice blurbs that we could put on the back cover. And it was interesting. Most of them looked at it as an adventure story, and people related to the adventure part of it as, which related to their trips to India or the adventures that they'd been through, or their adventures as a musician or a traveler or something like that. And only one or two, one of them was he's a professor at University of Tasmania, and another one who's he's also an academic. They had read a lot of the stuff that I was referring to, and so they were able to relate to it on both levels. So part of the challenge is what I want people to relate to it on the adventure level, and hopefully encourage them to follow up what it's about. And as I was saying to you, what's really interesting when you read it on Kindle, if you don't know who the Centaur is, or Apollo or Cerberus, if you just put your finger on the screen, it comes up with the definition. And so my daughter pointed this out to me. So she's reading it at the moment, and she's saying that I'm reading it on Kindle, and it's meant, it's meant the world to my understanding, that I can now, the bits I don't understand, I can press it and I can see what you're trying to say.
Yeah, you don't have to go run to Bullfinch's mythology every.
That's right. Or the Odysseus, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or Beowulf, or whatever. Yeah, it saves you all that trouble.
So that gets around the problem of writing these days, where one can never assume any set of references are available to any given reader. But if the references are hypertext, then it all can unfold if the person wants it to unfold.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading about T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland when that was first produced, and and he makes all sorts of references, to the Upanishads and Latin and various languages, and apparently the explanatory notes in the who was he writing for? It was Faber, I think. The explanatory notes are longer than the poem itself.
Well, I do have to, I can't resist putting in a plug for the program we're going to be doing on June 15th here, which is the day before Bloomsday. And we're going to have a program on James Joyce and Marshall McLuhan with Jung, and I'm going to be doing this with painter friend Elizabeth Brightman. And I said, the last thing, Elizabeth, that we should try to do is to make sense.
It's funny you say that. I was talking to an Irishman about Ulysses, and I said, you know what? I can't make head or tail of it. I've tried every 10 years. I sit down and I try and I try to see if I can work my way through it. And he said, you've got to have a pint or two. Do you understand? It makes perfect sense. He said, it's after you've had a pint, you can understand it perfectly well. And I thought, that is so Irish.
I have a couple of questions, if I could, to ask you, Richard. This has been very pleasurable. My first question, first and foremost, when is your book going to be out? I want to buy one or several. When and where is it available? And my second question to you personally, besides your lectures and your books that you're writing on, do you ever garden vegetables? Do you grow things? And what is your favorite prose or poetry? Do you read, or do you have a book of poetry or prose in the evening that you may read before you retire?
All right. Okay. Just go to books availability. I'm told that the galleys are coming out later this month. I'm told that Marco Rowley, the editor at Untimely Books, he said it's going to be ready on June the 20th, and I'm hoping that it's going to be available on Amazon, so people can buy it from Amazon. And so that's what I'm aiming at, because I think there's going to be, given the Australian theme of it, I think there's going to be quite a market in Australia, and posting the book over is not that practical. So I'm looking at the 20th of June when it's available. And what I'll do is when it is, I'll send Lisa a sell sheet. and you can distribute it to everyone, and please buy it.
I want to buy several copies, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Well,
you're asking me what I like to go to bed with.
Well, do you have a particular prose or an author, a poet, or do you do poetry? And if you do, my other question was, I guess, even more personal. Do you garden? Do you garden vegetables in where you live? Do you like to do that when you're not writing and lecturing about your adventures of the world?
We live on 3 acres, and,
Wow.
and part of it was formerly a vineyard. It's now gone into a field.
We have somebody here who can help you with that. Actually being a vineyard.
We've got a smaller section, about 1.5, 2 acres is landscape, and there's lawn and everything. And we have roses and flowers and things. My wife tends to that more. We did try vegetables, but we also have deer coming through. Our place is sort of like the McDonald's for the local deer going on the way to the forest, and they eat everything, and they devastated the cedars and so on. I've planted a lot of trees on the place, and one thing I'm trying to do with the field is I'm planting a lot of milkweed. I'm trying to turn the place into a sanctuary for the monarch butterfly, which David Suzuki Foundation and the local authorities say, to help them on their journey to Mexico.
Back here to Monterey.
Yeah.
They winter right down the street from here.
Very nice.
Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I've been planting a lot of milkweed with various degrees of success. And we see a few monarchs and a few others, but I'm still hopeful, and keep trying. So that's the main thing. I'm not a great gardener. One of the things I've also done in the field is I've cut this path, this sort of circular path. So when the grass is growing high, you go through this mysterious path, and I found some old logs, and I've sort of set up an elves circle with these old logs where you can sit down in the moonlight. So it's a bit of a quirky sort of thing that the neighbor doesn't understand what I'm going on about. He's got a perfectly manicured garden, and he's got robot lawnmowers mowing the lawn, and he doesn't understand why I'm laying it in grass. I'd love to have llama or goats or something, but because I travel quite a bit, it wouldn't work out. So I sort of do what I can. In terms of going to bed, one of my favorite poems would have to be Ulysses by Tennyson. And the idea of looking back on a life of adventure and then having to face the twilight years. So here's someone who's fought mighty battles and slept with goddesses and done great deeds, and now he's back home, and he's basically his son's a bureaucrat running Ithaca, and he's sort of sitting around wondering what he's going to do with himself in his retirement, and he's to strive to seek and not to yield.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's I suppose that's one of them. Yeah.
I'd like to speak if I could. I think
Yeah.
you encouraged us to share what we thought might be a hero's journey in our
Yeah,
own life.
please.
So I belong to a men's group called Pegasus. There's a bunch of us old guys. Quite a few of us have lost our wives here in the last few years. And as we grow older and our spouses, and in our case, all the women died first, we're supposed to die first. But this whole seeing our wives go from being very healthy women to becoming ever more ill, and we see that our wives went to this hero's journey as they got closer and closer to realizing that they were going to die, and how they faced their fear of death. And so it went from status quo before the realization that they were going to get deathly ill. They didn't know that was going to happen. Then they get very ill. And then we who love them get ill with them. And then something really awful happens to their body or to their brain. And they go into very deep fear. I don't mind dying. I just don't want to die in a painful way is the more common theme, But the truth is that you do have to come to terms with dying. It is no longer an abstract idea. It's a very real thing. And it's also very real for us husbands, because our life is coming to an end. And so we're kind of paralleling, they are really the hero. We are not, because they really are facing death. And then finally, how they're called home, you know, they go, and how they face it. In my case, my last wife chose to end it because she was so ill that the quality of her life wasn't worth having anymore. And just before we put her in a coma and kept in a coma, and that's to help her go, she was deathly ill, and she was having involuntary movements of her body, including her mouth was going like this incessantly. And it was just a painful thing to see. And once she made a decision that she wanted to end her life, it went away. All this involuntary movements. And that she became very at peace. And she reached a level of grace that we didn't think that she could ever have again. And then she said, okay, I'm ready. And we put her in a coma, and 2 days later, she left her body. But the point I'm making is that I witnessed a hero's journey firsthand, and it was my ever-loving wife. And that's as close as I've been to a hero's journey. You know, I've been a witness to it. And it's a beautiful thing. The death is to be in the presence of someone dying, someone you truly adore. It's an extraordinary thing. It does something to you that you come back to. I came to my status quo. I'm without her now. And I'm not the same person, and I wasn't the hero. So this thing of facing old age, having the body break down, having the brain break down, and then called home, spiritual world. And then we're left behind, you know, us who are still here. And we're not the same. It reminds you of this, what you're talking about. You know?
Yeah. But you are the hero. I mean, you know, part of the journey is the return, and it's the return with the elixir, right? So you come back from the journey, a changed person, you know, and a noble person. I'd like to know what's the elixir that you came back with? What do you think you learned from that you share with your friends in the circle?
Well, the eldest member is 92. He just lost his wife of 67 years. Another one is maybe 5 years older than I am, and he just lost his wife. Well, what we share, and as we get together and we talk about it, is it's very cliche. The whole thing is a bunch of cliches, but they're very true and they're very powerful. You know, we with each passing month, each passing year, we just become so grateful for having been loved by these women and having them be so forgiving of our flaws, you know. So you say, well, we're deifying them, but yeah, maybe we are deifying them. So what we share is that we were very honored to have been loved that way, to have been forgiven for being, you know, flawed. And then it ends so beautiful that we witnessed and we helped them, really, we helped them cross over. So we share about what it was like, the pain that brought us, you know, and getting them ready, attending to their bodies, and really attending to their soul, having them let go, so because the attachment to staying for the sake of the children, for the sake of the husband, is very powerful. And so we share, the elixir that we share is of letting go, the result of this. Yeah.
Wow.
Well, that's up there, the room.
That's very moving. Look, thanks very much for sharing that. That was very, I have to say, it was very moving, and certainly makes me think about a whole lot of things too. Someone who's past the age that my parents passed on it. You know, so in a sense, I think I'm living on borrowed time, in one sense.
It sounds too like another elixir you got was a kind of ability to have peace with your own death.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, at least from people I've met who have come very close to death, they seem there, something in them seems to shift. And what do I want to say? It's like people who have gotten like right, you know, on the edge of death, but didn't get pushed over, have a fuller experience of life.
Definitely.
Mm.
Yeah. And we know these are cliches, so we've all heard them for many years. You appreciate life more when you get close to death. You appreciate your wife when you no longer have your wife. But too bad, it's powerfully true. It's a cliche, but it's powerfully true. I am so grateful that I am able to appreciate the life that we had, you know.
What you also seem to bring up is that the hero's journey isn't always with an external monster or thing, you know, it's also with internal obstacles and monsters.
Very
Yeah,
much
they
so.
talk about the shadow being the dark side of us. You know, if I don't want to be flippant about this, but I'm thinking of the Batman movie where he's with the Joker, and it's a second or third one, and the Joker has got this hideous, distorted face, and it was a result of Batman in an earlier episode throwing him into a vat of chemicals or something. But anyway, there's this scene. It's a confrontation of the hero and the Joker, and the Joker says to Batman, he said, "You created me." You know, and you know, so you know, the sense is that we create the monsters that we face.
Right. Because Batman had one principle, which is not to kill people.
Mhm.
And the Joker's only principle is to cause mayhem.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah. I'm interested when you're in the group. I mean, how do the dynamics of it work? I mean, do you talk? Do you discuss a book? Do you sort of share stories, or do you sort of talk about, you know, how are you going? You know, how are you this week? You know, how do you deal with something like this with a group of people in the same situation?
Like, for example, this last dinner we had was about what I would call the tenets of our spiritual life, but he called them aphorisms. Really are principles by which we want to live the remainder of our life, you know. And so we each came prepared with what very well crafted, very powerful. Each of us called them a different thing. For example, my friend David said that one of his was, whatever is the obstacle, that's the way. The obstacle is the way. I wish he meant that whatever's stopping you, you have to go into it. You have to go into it rather than to avoid it. You know? And our pain of loss is that obstacle. You have a life of intimacy with someone for so long, and all of a sudden there's no intimacy in your life, and that's another obstacle. And you tend to want to avoid it. You tend to not want to look at it. You don't want to talk about it. But really, that's the way. You have to go into the vacuum of intimacy that you lived for so long, you took for granted. So usually it's a theme. And we relate to that theme through our own experiences. Not all the men in the group have lost their wives, but quite a few of us have.
How does it relate to the symbolism of the name of the group, Pegasus?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, will someone tell me what Pegasus was?
A horse with wings.
Yeah.
Oh, I see.
And who rode Pegasus? Who did Pegasus carry away? I don't remember.
Hercules.
I don't remember that. Hercules?
In the movie, in the Disney adaptation.
Well, I would share with you this way, that most of us have done a lot of inner work. Most of the men in the group have done a lot of inner work. So we have, in our old age, we're able to connect with men in a way that we couldn't when we were young.
Mhm.
Young men have a tough time connecting. I shouldn't say young, I should say younger men. To me, everybody's younger. It's tough to connect with men, you know? So in this group, we hug a lot and we cry, we kiss. So in some ways, we have wings, you know, we're flying in a way that we never flew before.
Mhm.
We're very intimate and we call it hot, you know, H-O-T, honest, open, transparent. And so I think the way I interpret the symbolism of Pegasus, and maybe the other fellows see it differently, is that we get to fly with men in a way that we never could before. We get to be intimate with men in a way that we couldn't be before.
Mm. Yeah. So I was interested because I mentioned Ulysses before, the poem, and there's a club in Australia, a motorcycle club called the Ulysses Club, which is based on that poem. And to join the club, you have to be, I think, over 40 or 50. And the subtext is, they call it "grow old disgracefully," and and one of the other sayings is, you know, squander your children's inheritance. And so you get these people buying expensive motorbikes and they go off and ride together. So it's these aging bikers that sort of go off and they have these wonderful stories about, you know, this motorcyclist being pulled up on the highway doing 190 kilometers an hour. What's that? 150 miles an hour, something like that, you know. And the police pulled over the motorcyclist, the helmet came off, and it was a little grey-haired old granny, and you know, who was a member of the club. So it's all about what they're doing is, I think, they're doing what Ulysses said, to strive to seek and not to yield. They're saying, you know, let's go out, you know, in a blaze of glory, rather than, you know, sit around with a plaid blanket and a cup of hot chocolate.
Amen.
But one of Pegasus' duties is carrying the thunderbolts of Zeus.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. What does that mean?
I just looked up Pegasus. The origins, there are origins back there, but then eventually Pegasus is brought to Mount Olympus by Zeus, stabled next to Zeus's thunderbolts, and one of his duties included carrying Zeus's thunderbolts.
He's wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, that fits very well, doesn't it? I mean, perhaps what you call the cliches are the thunderbolts.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Well said. Well said.
Yeah,
Well
yeah.
said. Uh-huh.
And
We
then,
do we
yeah,
do throw
and-
cliches at each other a lot. Yeah.
and there's nothing wrong with cliches, as they say. They come from an element of truth.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's why they're repeated.
Yep. Well, thank you, Richard. We're at 9 o'clock and we try to end on time to respect people's temporal needs, especially since you're 3 hours ahead of us and it's already, it's, the clock is striking midnight. You better get, catch your carriage.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for speaking with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I must apologize for my fumbling with the Zoom and that. I don't know what happened there, but I really enjoyed meeting with you and talking about the book. It was
Mhm.
great
I'm
experience.
looking forward to it.